The exploration of the role of violence in American society culminates in Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York. The cast, full of big names, amazing sets and costumes, fine editing and filming, really reflected the film's $97 million budget. Like I said, the filming overall was well done, and so was the editing. The costumes were really cool and accurate for the time, and I especially liked the hats. I think gangs now should have matching top hats instead of snapbacks and bandanas. But the set of the movie was probably my favorite part and definitely the most interesting. You could tell the set production team, headed by Dante Ferrari, wanted to get the look of Five Points just right. Five Points was originally built on a drained pond at the intersection of Cross Street, which is now Park Street, Anthony Street, which is now Worth, and Orange Street, which is now Baxter. The crew built the set based off of archival photographs, records, and illustrations, and Ferrari said that they built the set like the original buildings from bricks, stone, cobblestone, and wood, not digital effects. So it looked real and it stayed true to how Five Points would have actually looked during the 19th century. And like the buildings are all crammed together and they look worn and then they're like leaning and sinking into the ground. It looks exactly like a Jacob Riis picture. And I think it would be cool to see what Five Points would have looked like today, but it's probably for the best that it was leveled and now separated into parts of Little Italy, Chinatown, and various courthouses. The characters and casting was pretty average for me. Like, they had some big names in there. That was about it. Leonardo DiCaprio played the main character, Amsterdam, and I actually didn't really like him in this role. His accent just didn't work for me, but his actual acting was fine. Daniel Day-Lewis really stole the show, though. He played Bill the Butcher, head of a nativist Protestant gang. And the character seemed really well developed, and it seemed like he was conscious of his actions. Like, there was an actor playing an actor, and it just seemed really good. And that he was definitely the best actor and outshined the others. Then lastly, Cameron Diaz played Jenny, a pickpocket con woman, and I wish she would have had a bigger part in the movie besides just being the love interest, and I wish they would have explored Jenny's and Bill's relationship more. Like they touched on it, how like Bill took Jenny in, but that was about it. They didn't explore it at all. And then in the actual movie, the beginning and end made sense, but everything in between just seemed like this strange, muddled mess. Like, it just had this overall sense of disorganization. Despite the movie being over 3 hours long, it felt like it had this unfinished. It seemed unfinished. And that the whole plot and storyline was just kind of too simple for me. Or not like simple, but just like a stereotypical movie plot. Like Amsterdam is trying to avenge his father's murder and thus gaining the respect of his people, but he has to overcome the temptations of Bill's power and money. I think the best scene in the movie was the knife throwing scene. It really caught my attention, and that was the only part where I really didn't know what was gonna happen. Like, was Bill gonna throw a knife right into Jenny? Who knows? And then I think Sources did a really poor job with the actual gangs, in my opinion. In the movie, it seemed like the gangs were just like fighting to fight, and that there just happened to be political undertones, and that the fighting really seemed grounded in nothing but blood. The gang wars seemed like it was only there to please the audience and keep our attention instead of serving the actual purpose that they did. And that was probably the biggest problem in the movie for me, and that the director interpreted the gangs as like the precursor to the 1920s organized crime mobs, when really the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys were more political clubs that would fight for their candidates and at the polls. And then also in these fights, they didn't have swords and broad axes. Like you would maybe see it, but you wouldn't see whole mobs with them. And that the huge melees depicted in the movie were really rare events, and that the kind of Super Bowl of gang warfare in the beginning and end didn't actually take place in the 19th century in Five Points. But the very beginning and ending scenes, I think were probably the best part. Like the opening scene was this man telling his young son to never wipe the blood off the blade. And then for 168 minutes, that's exactly what Amsterdam did. He never wiped the blood off the blade. And then the movie ends on like a proud yet melancholy note that modern America was born in all this gang violence, but it was unjustly forgotten. And I think that's really interesting to think about, especially now with all this talk about immigration and how a big portion of New York was made of Irish immigrants and that they had to fight for their rights. And then in my research, I found that sources did a lot of exaggerating. Like, there was a lot of background events that were historically accurate, but the actual plot, he exaggerated a lot. Like, Five Points was not some unrelievedly dangerous place. Like, although it was home to the poor and immigrants, it had about like the same crime rates as any other place in the city. And then, like I said earlier, the persona was exaggerated as well as their fighting. And then, although Bill the Butcher was a real person, he was not a nativist gang leader. He was a well-known Whig who happened to be killed by an Irishman. And yeah, Gangs of New York, it was a good movie, but it did not have to be 3.5 hours long. And I liked it, but I will definitely not watch it again.